Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this important hearing on this critical subject. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. You know, I just have to say, I think that we're suffering from a increased market concentration here in the United States with the pharmaceutical companies, combined with over-reliance on foreign nations and foreign industry abroad. We put those two things together. It's disastrous. It's disastrous not just for our industry, though that is absolutely true. It's disastrous for everyday consumers. And this is one of the reasons, let's take a drug that we haven't yet talked about, but that millions of people, 34 million at least people in this country rely on every day, and that's insulin. We got 3 companies in this country that produce insulin, and yet the cost of it, which has not substantially changed in terms of manufacturing it over the last century, insulin's been around forever, the cost of it has just exploded. Now, why is that? I'd submit to you one of the reasons is market concentration. This is why one of the reasons, by the way, I've introduced legislation that would cap the cost of insulin on a monthly basis at $25. I think that Americans should not be paying more out of pocket than that, and I don't think that these monopolies ought to be ripping off consumers in order to pad their own profits. And for the same reason, I'm very concerned about our over-reliance on China in particular. And I would just notice, I want to get into some of these statistics, that our over-reliance on China when it comes to these drugs has really exploded since the turn of the century. I mean, since 1999, 2000, 2001. What happened around that time? Well, we gave China most favored nation status on a permanent basis. We brought China into the WTO and gave them full access to the international trade market. Disastrous mistake. They weaponized it. They've taken our industry. They have taken control in many cases of manufacturing, including some of this drug market. It's really exceptional. So I think this ought to be a wake-up call that it's time to change course. Ms. Raghavendran, let me start with you. Your medicine supply map, which Senator Hassan mentioned a second ago, I think is great and really shows just how dependent on foreign manufacturers we have become. Just looking at the manufacturing locations associated with active API drug master files, if I'm reading it correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, fully 60%, as of 2021, 60% were based either in India or in China. The United States accounts for just 10%. And what caught my attention is the change over the last 20 years. I mean, here again, in 2000, India contributed 20% of active API files. That percentage tripled by 2021 to 62%. In 2000, China contributed just 4% of active API files. That share increased sixfold by 2021 to 23%. By contrast, what happened in this country in 2000, the United States contributed 15% of active API, but in 2021, just 4%. In Europe, really, I mean, 49% they contributed in 2000, only 7% by 2021. I mean, that is really astounding. So let me just ask you, do you think that being overexposed to China and India, and of course we know that China supplies India with 80% of its APIs, China being, or India rather, being the world's largest producer of generic drugs, do you think being overexposed to China has major implications for our national security?
Senator Hawley, thank you for the question. I am not a national security expert. I'm a drug shortages expert. What I can tell you is that we see 4 different types of risk for drug shortage. Geographic concentration is one of them. But there's other factors. There's low prices, there's manufacturing complexity, and there's quality failures. So when we design solutions, we have to look at the whole picture, and it's a multifaceted problem.
Let me ask you about the U.S.-China Commission's recommendation. They recommended that the United States, and I'm quoting them now, maximize the production of such goods, meaning drug precursors and other critical medical supplies, maximize the production of such goods domestically or as appropriate from trusted countries. Do you agree with that recommendation?
Senator, I think the specifics matter, and I'd be happy to get back to you with a statement for the record, but USP doesn't have a position on that.
Dr. Schumann, let me just ask you, because in your written testimony, you mentioned the Shanghai plant example. You brought it up again, I think, to Senator Blumenthal. What a dramatic impact that had on your practice and your patients at the VA, and of course not just yours, but at VA hospitals nationwide. give me your view on this. Just tell us about, for your patients, the people that you serve, what does our over-reliance and exposure to foreign adversaries, China's a foreign adversary, what does that mean practically for them in moments of crisis, in moments of danger, in situations like we had with COVID and may have in the future, should we be in a kinetic conflict with China?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for your advocacy on this really important issue. I confess I know much more about surgical anatomy than the geopolitical situation that we're talking about. But what I will say is when I'm talking to my patients, frankly, whether it's a veteran or someone at a private hospital, they don't necessarily care where the drug is coming from or what is going on other than the fact that they don't have it. And that's how I feel as well. As a doctor, as an ethicist, as somebody with administrative oversight of drug shortage management, what we are dealing with is a situation in which doctors, patients are truly handcuffed by the seemingly unpredictable nature of these drug shortages. And this is a perfect example where one single factory going down dramatically impacted our supply. So there's absolutely no doubt that we are vulnerable as a nation, but also as individual patients and doctors to this issue. And I'm so thankful that this committee is facing this head on and that we can hopefully bring the supply back to American soil in a way that will allow us to be more reliable.
Let me just ask before my time expires, Dr. Fox, last week the committee held a hearing on cybersecurity risks in the healthcare sector, and I was particularly concerned about risks to rural healthcare. And so let me ask you about that in this context, drug shortages and their effect on rural communities. Do drug shortages, do you know, disproportionately affect rural hospitals, rural communities? Should we be concerned about that?
Yes, they do, and in part because those rural communities often don't have full resources like academic medical centers like I and Dr. Schumann work at. They are disparately impacted. And just to your past line of questioning, I do want to just say that private companies are choosing to invest in China and manufacture there, and yet they don't reveal where they're making their products. It's not a requirement for those companies to reveal which products are made in China, which products are made in India, which products are made in the US. And without that information, we really are vulnerable.
That's a great point, and I hope something that this committee can work on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.